Peace to me is a world free from discrimination, harassment.
Peace exists where diverse cultures live in harmony.
Peace for me, it means the ability to express compassion for people.
Peace means joyful.
Peace is a state of security, harmony, and cohesion.
Peace is a sweet language. It's just like a song.
Peace for me is a feeling of fulfillment.
Peace is nonviolent communication.
Peace is freedom.
Peace means stability, security, and being respectful with each other.
Peace means love for everybody.
Peace is the capacity of overcome differences without hurting each other.
Peace is to respect and accept the difference with another ones.
Peace is compromise, and it's healing.
In one word, peace for me is interconnectedness.
Peace means having empathy for other people.
Basically, peace means justice.
Peace is understanding.
It's a liberty of opinion.
Peace means political stability.
A sense of calm and confidence.
Peace is unity. Peace is diversity.
In short, peace is serenity.
Peace can mean so many things to us, as we just heard, but it's what we all hope for.
Buongiorno, bonjour, guten Morgen, and welcome to the second day of the third International Cooperation Forum. We welcome you from Basel to continue our discussions on the topic, what is peace?
And like yesterday, you can not only follow us here in Basel, you can also join us wherever you are, online, and you can join in by submitting the question by simply scanning the QR code. It will hopefully appear soon.
Today we want to emphasize changing the perspective and therefore invite you to look at new approaches and ideas through a different lens.
Fitting with this notion of thinking outside the box, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. He's a physician and a molecular geneticist specializing in immunology. As a basic researcher, he decoded genetic causes of dozens of hereditary diseases at German and international research institutions. He came to the conclusion that many diseases could be cured by or prevented by appropriate nutrition and a more natural lifestyle. A thesis that has been widely debated amongst the academic circle, but also the wider public.
So the next half an hour, Dr. Michael Nels will speak about what the brain needs to be able to think peace. And don't forget that you can send your questions by scanning the QR code. We will have 15 minutes for your questions after his speech. So, herzlich willkommen, welcome to Basel, Michael, Dr. Nels. Dr. Michael Nels.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much to the organizers of this meeting to invite me. It was quite a challenge. Even the question was kind of a challenge for me. What does the brain need to think peace? But it was not such a big challenge because the overarching question, what does the brain need to think at all, was the topic of my work the last 10 to 15 years. So you all saw the ideas, what people have, what is peace. And I don't want to go into that because there was this very interesting and nice introduction. But when you look at all these words, or most of these words, they are very similar to what researchers on peace have identified as important to have peace. And like, for example, already in the 17th century, Baruch Spinoza said, peace is not the absence of war. It is a virtue, a state of mind, an inclination towards benevolence, trust, and justice. Similarly, Dorothy Celine Thompson, his researcher, said not the absence of conflict, but the presence of creative alternatives for responding to conflict, alternatives to violence. Peace has to be created in order to be maintained. Similarly, Inga Skjelsbæk, a peace researcher at the Institute of Oslo, said in 2022, Peace is not just the absence of war, but also well-being and resilience to conflict. If I look at all what I've pointed out here in green, these are all parts or important aspects of what I call the mental immunity. The mental immunity, the mental immune system. Thinking peace requires all these components of a functioning and healthy brain. And the mental immune system can be located in some place, because we need the whole brain, but there's one portion of the brain which is very important for thinking peace, for thinking at all. That's our autobiographical memory center. It's located here in the temporal lobe. It looks like a seahorse when you look at it from an anatomic side. That's why it's called hippocampus. So the hippocampus is very important for thinking and thinking at all. We cannot plan a future without having a hippocampus. So the hippocampus function, the function of the seahorse, requires a growth of the seahorse the whole life. Our autobiographical memory can grow as we grow older. It's the only portion of the brain that has this ability to produce new nerve cells. It's called adult hippocampal neurogenesis. And produced are so-called index neurons. Index neurons are required that we can remember our own thoughts. Everything that we experience, our past, and without a past, of course, we wouldn't be able to construct the future. So index neurons are necessary that we can envision a new future, that we can think, and they have also additional functions. One function is, for example, they provide us with psychological resilience, resilience to conflict. And they also provide us with curiosity, and curiosity and resilience together provide us with experience, because we are willing to make new adventures. When we create new adventures, when we are thinking about new things, if we learn new things, then our individuality grows. And with more individuality, we are more creative, of course. But what I also identified over the last 10 years is that the index neurons provide us with the mental energy source that is necessary to think. Without these new index neurons that are born every night when we sleep, we would not be able to, we would not be willing to engage real thinking, because we would override previous thoughts without having these new index neurons to secure the new thoughts. Last but not least, this is a contrast to passion, what's the right word? Empathy. The contrast to empathy is rational compassion. Empathy is something local. We see somebody suffering, and we have the inclination to help. Of course, that's very important. But we also have to think about what our local actions have as consequences in the far distance to other people, in time and in space. And for that, we need the thinking capacity of the hippocampus. These all functions here are together the mental immune system, both for the individual, but also for the society. What do I mean by society? Society, quite simple. If the society is asked a question, it's a rhetorical question for you. What group of people is more likely to solve the problem? This group or this group? It's a rhetorical question, you don't have to answer it. In my last book, I gave it a mathematical quotation to that, as that the sum of individuals multiplied by the degree of individuality is the level of the innovative capacity of a society, and the overall ability to think peace. So, the hippocampus, as I already mentioned, can grow our whole life. This is the growth curve in volume, which is natural for the hippocampus. And this is the reality in our societies, in modern societies. We have a shrinkage rate which is about 1 to 2 to 1 to 4% per year, which is the cause of declined psychological resilience, of anxiety syndromes, chronic exhaustion, major depression, and in the long term, as I've shown in the paper I published a few years ago, Unified Theory of Alzheimer's Disease, it's the cause of Alzheimer's. Okay, what do we need to make the hippocampus grow? What do we need to have a system in our brain that can think, allows us to think, and allows us to think peace? These are all areas of a natural life, and a natural life would look like this. I want to be brief. The most important thing here is that each individual area, being engaged with people, being physically active, have enough time to sleep, and so forth, all produce either hormones or are necessary to feed the hippocampus with the necessary ingredients. So then the hippocampus is happy, and here's just a list of all the vitamins and hormones and whatever is produced when we engage in these types of areas of let's say, natural human life. I have not much time, so I want to look at just one area here, and this is about food, the left one here. The natural food for humans in a long history of evolution was fish. Fish from aquatic sources and at the oceans. And iodine, vitamin D, lithium, aquatic omega-3 fatty acids were provided. But I know that most of the world population, not only in the global south, but also the global north, suffer from deficiencies in these areas. And I'll give you one example for that. This is vitamin D. So vitamin D and the hippocampus are closely connected because vitamin D is transformed into a hormone that regulates genes in cells, cells of the mental immune system and cells of our physical immune system. So the biotropic effects of vitamin D are now beyond dispute in brain development and function. So we can imagine if you have a lack of vitamin D, your brain doesn't function well. Okay, this means vitamin D deficit is associated with accelerated brain aging in the general population, and you can actually measure the likelihood of developing Alzheimer's as a result of this deficiency. That is a 7% decrease in Alzheimer's we have if we raise the vitamin D level, vitamin D prohormone level, by 10 millimole per liter in a person. This is, of course, now in Germany. In Africa, it looks much different. I'll give you an example for that later on. But here in Germany, this is the normal curve of vitamin D prohormone level in the blood during the year. And this would be the normal level, the natural level, which you measure in African people that live outside in the wild still, like Aztec and the Maasai. You see all the publications on the bottom here. So 125 nanomole is an average good level for healthy brain. But we have in Germany, for example, a much lower level. And this has consequences. I showed you the slide with the increased risk of Alzheimer's disease. So this is 10 times 10 nanomole. So that means we have a 70% increase of Alzheimer's by just having a lack of vitamin D in the population in Germany. And this is a problem everywhere in the world. Even people who live on the equator, based on cultural style, have a lack of vitamin D. But it also increases the mortality to diseases, for example, COVID. This is a result of the University of Heidelberg. They showed that if you are below 30 nanomole per liter, you have an 18-time increased risk of dying of COVID. So it's not only the mental immune system that suffers from a vitamin D deficiency, it's also the physical immune system. And so the German Cancer Research Center, for example, published based on these data, 9 of 10 COVID deaths could be prevented by just raising the vitamin D level. And actually a meta-study of many studies, which combines many studies, did statistical analysis, and they showed if we have a zero mortality at the level that would be natural. Quite astounding. So we now know vitamin D is very important, but we learn now, for example, from the New England Journal of Medicine, the most prestigious journal in the world on clinical studies, vital findings on a decisive verdict. Vitamin D supplements do not have important health benefits, even on those that have low levels of vitamin D. And so they suggest that we should stop screening for vitamin D deficiency, recommend vitamin D to prevent major diseases or extend life. Really strange, isn't it? But we also learn from the Lancet, similarly prestigious at the same year, in a study on COVID vaccines, for example, here, we see here that after 8 to 9 months after the second vaccination, you are actually worse off than the ones that didn't get vaccinated. This is a study from 2 million Swedish people. 1 million got the injection, 1 million did not. And they say these findings provide the evidence-based rationale for administration of a third vaccine. Okay, What does it mean? It means that natural protection by vitamin D to be replaced by gene therapeutic vaccine strategy. This cannot be healthy for our physical body, but it cannot be healthy for our brain. So I don't know where the future will lie for humanity, but this is the wrong way, in my opinion. So when you look at all these different areas, this is where the hippocampus would be happy. The reality looks much different. We have many, many areas where we know for sure with sufficient data that they are neurotoxic for the brain. And there are actually consequences of that is chronic exhaustion, depression, and Alzheimer's. But there are also people who suffer even worse situations like existential crisis all over the world. War and destruction, and existential crisis leads to post-traumatic stress, which is shown to be the hallmark of post-traumatic stress syndrome is a small hippocampus, a shrunken hippocampus. So this is really, really bad. And what are the causes of that? Why is the hippocampus shrinking? Well, it can shrink very quickly. This is also a publication of the New England Journal of Medicine, published in December 5 in 2019. A group of 8 people were living at the Antarctic, studying the ice, I guess, and they were compared to people who stayed at home. And you see in red the reduction of hippocampal volume, particularly of the part where the adult hippocampal neurogenesis takes place, necessary for a healthy mental immune system. It's a reduction of almost 8% in 14 months. And the scientists who published that said, okay, for the hippocampal shrinkage, 2 major factors seem to play an important role. First is social isolation. The second factor is monotony. And 3 or 4 months later, a big part of the world population was put in this situation, social isolation and monotony. So we got further hippocampal shrinkage. Actually said, with prison inmates in solitary confinement, I'm pretty sure we'd see the same thing. So that was published in 2019. 2018, the World Economic Forum told us depression is the #1 cause of ill health and disability worldwide, meaning in 2018, the mental immune system of the human society was at its lowest. And from this low, after 6 months into the COVID measures, we had a 3-fold increase. From the all-time low, a 3-fold increase by solitary confinement and many other measures and lack of purpose in life and so forth based on the things that happened to us. So the brain was put in an even worse situation after just 6 months. What are the reasons for that? First of all, we have the post-traumatic stress syndrome and the pre-traumatic stress syndrome, which are very similar. The pre-traumatic requires only the narrative of fear. And what the stressed nerve cells are producing are so-called DAMs. These are danger-associated molecular patterns. Molecules that are usually not outside the brain cells, but now are recognized by microglia. These are immune cells in the brain. If the microglia TLR4 recognize the DAMs after stress in the brain, then a cascade of events takes place up to the nucleus, and in the nucleus of these cells, pro-inflammatory cytokines are produced. These pro-inflammatory cytokines are the same, actually, which are known for the cytokine storm in COVID. And they have a specific function in the brain. They stop the production of new nerve cells in the hippocampus. They're actually very efficient doing that. So we have a blocked adult hippocampal neurogenesis, which means we have a reduced psychological resilience, and that closes the vicious cycle of neuroinflammation, which many, many people, maybe most people, are suffering from right now. This leads to chronic exhaustion. We have exhausted society. We have depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and Alzheimer's disease. But also, molecules from pathogens can do that. For example, the S1 subunit of the spike mRNA can do the same thing. Then they are called PAMs, pathogen-associated molecular patterns. They also activate very efficiently TLR4, the same cascade, and this is called spikopathy or brain fog. Now, that looks really sad, but there is a solution. I've shown recently that with low-dose essential lithium, you can block GSK3, and people with brain fog, it disappears. The University of Buffalo in northern New York showed that from 10 patients with brain fog based on spikopathy, 9 had immediately a remedy after just low dose lithium. The strange thing is, at this dose, as I've shown, and you can go on my website, there's a Substack on that, it's the essential dose, essential lithium. Lithium is really extending life. But the essentiality is not recognized by the world community. This is one of my big works for the next years, to show the world lithium is essential, and it can be not only used as a therapeutic intervention, it can also be preventive, because it dampens the neuroinflammatory process required to have an efficient mental immune system. So, the greatest long-term threat, in my opinion, for the whole society of the world is the collapse of the individual mental and thus social immune system. We will end up with a group of humans that are sad, that are depressed, that cannot essentially solve problems. But there's hope. The mental immune system is capable of regeneration because we have the adult hippocampal neurogenesis. We can always restart the production of new nerve cells, even at the age of 70 or 80. It was shown if you change your lifestyle, with 70 years old, you get a 2% increase of growth of the hippocampus per year instead of a 1.4% suppression or reduction, shrinkage. So, the greatest long-term threat of our time, in my opinion, at the moment, is also the greatest opportunity for a mentally healthier future. So, in order to be able to think peace, in my opinion, we need national healthcare systems that respect the requirements of human nature, give it what it needs. If we do that, then we can, it's quite obvious, of course, we can ignore the reality of our natural needs, but we cannot ignore the harmful consequences of that ignorance. And to close my talk here, I want to cite some philosophers here. So the greatest long-term threat also requires trust in freedom. Peace is possible only through freedom, says Karl Jaspers, and freedom is possible only through truth. Therefore, falsehood is the real evil that destroys all peace. In science, we use the concept by Sir Karl Popper, another philosopher, of falsifiability, meaning it's a method of science, and it should be, of course, of public discourse, to advance towards the truth. But this method requires, again, the freedom to express one's opinion, and the trust, of course, that it will not be used against oneself. And with that, I will actually close it here with words directly from Sir Karl Popper. We must plan for freedom and not for security, if perhaps for no other reason that only freedom can ensure security. And if you want to have more information on all that, going into more detail, you can, of course, check this out. And I thank you very much for your attention.
Herzlichen Dank. Thank you, Dr. Nels. Before handing over to the audience, I'm sure they have many questions for you. I would like to ask you a question. So allow me one question I've prepared backstage while listening to you. I'm thinking about the actual situation, the current situation. So maybe to underline some thought you discussed. Those in the middle of conflicts, I mean, those people are traumatized, they are afraid, they are grieving. So my question is about empathy. Is it possible to activate areas that enable people to feel empathy towards the other, towards the enemy?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Actually, when I was here yesterday and listened to all the talks, I said, how far away I am with my thoughts here. So is it really practical? Makes it any sense when people have local conflicts? I'm talking here about lithium and about vitamin D and omega-3 fatty acids. But in the long term, if we really want to ensure that people feel empathy, I rather actually like the word rational compassion, because empathy is really local, it's very focused, but rational compassion means you think about the consequences of what you are doing in long term or on other places on the earth. So if my local actions have consequences for others, but to be able, in my opinion, to have this kind of empathy, this rational compassion, to solve conflicts, to be open to new ideas, you need a mental immune system that is functioning. So for people, not only in these areas that you're mentioning, but also people in Germany, for example, which are very traumatized to it through childhood events or so. Post-traumatic stress syndrome is a problem there too. The therapy requires not only that you talk to the people, you also have to plant, so essentially to plant a new idea in their brain to think about the world maybe in a different way. You have to plow essentially the ground for it. You have to make it fertile. And the fertilization of the brain is necessary, and the ingredients I've shown. You have to give people more. So in order to have a better world, we need both. We need to talk, but we also have to put the brain into a situation where it is receptive for such talks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now we go into the questions. I always start from the most popular to the one. It's changing all the time, so I'm trying to catch the first one. I'm concerned about the impacts of social media and addictive screen use, especially for children and young people, with huge consequences for neurological development, social cohesion and peace. Do you agree? And what is your prescription? It's from Peter Pope.
I agree fully. Close to this, but also the time you spend, because we have only a certain amount of time every day we can use useful. And from historical perspective, historic meaning prehistoric, but even up to maybe the 19th, early 20th century, the coherence of the family, the interaction with friends was very important. I mean, when I was a kid, we played together, and we didn't sit separate in our room and just looked at a screen. And I think we have to respect, also, as I mentioned already, the natural needs of humans, and people need direct human contact. We are social beings, and this is poison for the social interaction.
So you say all of it is poisoned, or just the amount we're using?
The amount is the problem. I mean, it's always the amount. I mean, it's not like we have to go back into the Stone Age and live in cages. We have to accept that there are changes in the world, and there are good changes. I mean, being able to meet everybody quickly via internet is a very good thing, but it all has to be balanced. This is what actually my slide showed. You have to balance all these different areas, but you can only balance them if you know what is important. Once you know what is important for a mentally healthy brain, once you know that, you can better essentially set your points and make the balance.
So we go into the next question. It's from Anonymous. You're saying for peace we need the ability to think, but we can also think war. What specifically makes us to think in terms of compassion and cohesion?
Actually, Daniel Kahneman, who inspired me deeply, he actually got the Nobel Prize in 2002 for the question of how do we essentially respond to a conflicting situation? How do we solve problems? And he actually recognized that we have two areas in our brain, or two different types of thinking. Thinking one and thinking two. Thinking one is actually non-thinking, it's just reacting instinctively. And system two is the actual thinking, that what I was describing. I didn't use the term, but the mental immune system is about system two. So system two allows us, of course, also to think war. But if we are in a situation where we are confronted and we are not able to engage system two, we will always respond to war with war, because it's our instinct. We will, if somebody wants to hit us, we hit back or we flee. But we don't start a discussion. We don't step back and say, okay, let's talk about this, because that would require system two, and that means we require a functioning system, mental health.
So then how can one end generational trauma from war if stress caused by fear and trauma reduces psychological resilience and feeds the cycle of neuroinflammation?
Yeah, it's a huge problem. It's maybe something that we can hope to solve. It would require a lot of activity on an individual basis. But as I already mentioned before, we have such cases here in Germany too, post-traumatic stress syndrome, of course not as severely as I've shown in the pictures here, and many people here in the audience experience at home. But still, if you want to solve this post-traumatic problem, you have to discuss it, you have to talk about it and all these things. But to be open-minded, to be more open-minded, it has to have a brain that is willing to, more likely to overcome the problem. So, for example, if you produce more index neurons, then you have the ability to get these new thoughts in and can start to compare my new thoughts based on a new future, based on my past, and the things become more comparable, they become more rational to be in your brain, and it's one way maybe to overcome it, but this is only my hope, of course, but it makes a lot of sense.
What is a simple routine I can integrate to my daily routine to think peace and to continue to believe that a peaceful world is possible?
Yeah, I think the routine has to be that we accept what our body needs, what our brain needs, because it's not only about physical health, what we talk about all the time. Everything that our physical body needs, also our brain needs. There's no separation. And if we understand what our human nature requires, and I've shown that, I guess, then we are on the best way, because then we grow resilience. We are more willing to take maybe risk. Yeah, the risk, for example, to engage in a discussion with somebody who has a different opinion. It takes a lot of courage. And all courage is very closely linked to resilience. Curiosity is very closely linked to resilience. And it all requires, as we know very, very strongly now from the basic research, it requires the production of these nerve cells. So we should do things that help to support the growth of these nerve cells, and we have to stop doing things that harm them.
So I think we're almost out of time, but I think I want to ask one last question. How can we apply your theory in countries with ongoing conflicts, as they have less freedom to take care of their mental health?
Yeah, it's a very, very difficult question. That's, I guess, why I'm here. Yeah, to maybe help to answer these questions, at least give some guidance. But for that, we need to sit on a table and ask very seriously, if we want to help people, what do they need? I mean, as I've shown already, we need many things that are very natural to us. And if they are lacking, then of course the human brain suffers. And suffering human brain is less willing to stop a conflict and engage in discussions and negotiations and be curious about the other person's opinion. And so I think we have to do here a dual process. It's pretty much like the question on trauma, where we talk about the individual. The same applies for the society. We have to approach the society in a dual way. We have to give the population everything it needs, at the same time start the peace process. But the peace process without a population that is willing to engage in discussion, many might be, but the majority might not, as we know from the depression rates worldwide, then I would say we have to work on both screws, so to speak, on the interaction and in talking, and also in the interaction in supporting everything that's necessary for a healthy life.
Thank you very much. Thank you also for your participation. Maybe a practical question. If you want to start today, this morning, what do we do?
Well, don't eat breakfast.
Okay.
I guess that's a little bit too late.
It was no, but ketogenesis is very important. Actually, it feeds the brain very well with fuel, and at the same time, it's a hormone that activates neurogenesis. So fasting is actually a good thing.
Thank you very much.
If you don't overdo it, of course.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nels.
We didn't have time for all of your questions, but I'm sure Dr. Nels will be staying here, so there will be individual discussions possible later on.
Catherine, it was already said yesterday by the President of Ethiopia, and we missed no opportunity to repeat it today.
Hopla.
Women's participation in political decision-making and peace processes is crucial, both in their community level and also at a national level.
There is evidence that inclusion of women make a peace agreement more likely to succeed and also contribute to longer-lasting peace. The same can be said about the inclusion of different viewpoints and requirements. But bringing them together is often not easy, obviously.
Today we do have another important question, whether it is possible to gain trust even amongst unlike-minded people. So this is what our next panel will be talking about in a moment, but let us introduce you the host first. 8 years ago, Pascale Beresville was appointed as the State Secretary of the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs, and she was the first woman ever to head the Swiss diplomatic service. Currently, she is the permanent representative of the United Nations.
And she's also from Basel, so welcome here on stage, Pascale Beriswil.
Herzlich willkommen.
Minister, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends of peace, it's a great honor and pleasure to welcome you to this first panel today. And I would like to start with a quote. Trust is like the air we breathe. As long as it is there, we don't even notice it. It's a quote by a philosopher, Martin Hartmann, a professor at the University of Lucerne and incoming director of that university. And we have been discussing for the last 24 hours about peace, the complexity of peace, what it needs to think peace, including with nutrition. And in more or less every discussion, including today with Dr. Nels, who quoted Spinoza and Karl Jaspers, one key ingredient which was mentioned was trust. And the lack thereof, we all speak and refer to a crisis of trust. Both presidents yesterday referred to that crisis of trust. And last year, when Switzerland was chairing the UN Security Council, our minister was presiding a debate about trust. And we had the UN Human Rights Commissioner, Volker Türk, explaining to us why the protection of human rights can increase trust. And we had an African Union Youth Ambassador explaining to us what it needs that youth would trust the institutions more. And we had a professor of the King's College explaining to us how technologies can be used to increase trust. So we are discussing trust in our daily life and work in a more or less thoughtless manner. We just speak about trust, and maybe that's not even bad because it means that it's there. But since we are all referring to a crisis, I think it's fair enough to talk about that. So we say we want or should trust our government. I hope you all do. Our friends, the police or the police officer. I even want to trust my bankomat that it spites out money when I put in a code. So this proliferation of the word of trust made me somehow suspicious, and I hope a little bit after listening to Dr. Nels that it came from the hippocampus. So I was wondering, what are we actually really talking about? What kind of a trust do we need to forge peace? And what is the relation between trust and reliance, or trust and truth, as we saw, or trust and culture? Is there a cultural element to trust? Do we build trust the same way at the community level or at the regional level in the UN Security Council? And of course, I realize as soon as we start thinking about trust and talking about trust, it is at risk. Its power is its invisibility. But still, since there is a crisis, we need to talk about it. And I have the immense privilege to having a brilliant, fantastic panel. And I would like to invite my panelists to the podium, Sima Samar, Itonde Kakuma, and Olin Monteiro. Please join us here. And please join them with it. Thank you. So let me briefly introduce our panelists. Sima Samar, many of you know her. She is a former Nobel Peace Prize nominee. She is actually a trained medical doctor. I'm sure that our minister is happy to hear that, from Afghanistan. She has been a lifelong human and women's rights advocate. She was the first Minister of Women Affairs of Afghanistan, but also for many years a refugee, and she just published a book which is called Outspoken, My Fight for Freedom and Human Rights in Afghanistan. So a very warm welcome, Sima Samar.
Thank you.
And then we have with us Itonde Kakuma. He grew up in the United States, but his family originally comes from the Great Lakes region. He is the president of Interpeace, which is a dedicated think tank to promoting peace. but he has served in many of the most famous think tanks and organizations like the Carter Center or the Ahtisaari Foundation, and he has actually dedicated his whole adult life to peace promotion. So very warm welcome also to you, Itonde. And last, but certainly not least, I am very pleased to also introduce Olin Monteiro. She is part of a huge network called Peace Women Across the Globe. She is an Indonesian writer, artist, activist, and researcher. So she works at the crossroads between peace and arts. She has been working with many international organizations as much as with film productions. So very warm welcome also to you, Olin, here on stage. And as I said, I wanted to ask them first to think behind peace. So the first thing would be, what is trust in your experience, and what is actually the crisis of trust we are talking about? And then in a second set of questions, and I'm already revealing the 3 sets of questions so that you can prepare for that, how do you build trust in your peace work, in particular, as the topic of this panel is, between unlike-minded people? And then in the third round, we would like to look towards the way forward and the future. What is the power of trust, actually? What are maybe innovative new ways of thinking trust in order to promote peace? So, Seema, I would like to start with you. What is trust for you? And I understand you brought us also a picture.
Yes. First of all, it's my pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for inviting me. The second point that I would like to mention, although we don't have a lot of time, but I would like everyone to stand up for acknowledgement of the suffering of the victims for 30 seconds. Thank you so much. This is for suffering 30 years of genocide in Rwanda. This is for the acknowledgement of women suffering under Taliban in Afghanistan and women suffering under patriarchy all over the world, as we say. I think it's, for me, it's very, very important to acknowledge the suffering of the people in order to build the trust. And I brought this picture because I wanted to show that coexistence built the trust. I went to my son's house in Houston. The nest was just in front of the kitchen door. So I watched how they, the first baby came up, and then how these mother and the father of the birds were trusting us because we were walking around and they were not hiding from us or trying to feed their babies. So that shows that if we coexist with everything, that will build the trust between the people. And I think the other issue that I would like to mention is that it requires a lot of political will, and it requires to trust ourselves. For me, to trust myself and to trust that I want to do this work for betterment of the public. So we say, we have a proverb in our language that we say, you promote the good things that you want for yourself. If I want peace for myself, if I want food for myself, then I would like the other people also to have that. I think it's also, when we say on coexistence, that we have to tolerate the differences. For me, toleration is not enough. We have to acknowledge, we have to accept that there is a difference, and we have to live with that kind of a difference. So that is, I think, is key in order to have a trust. What is, unfortunately, I see in my country is the denial of the fact, the denial that exists, the discrimination that exists. Denial do not help to find the solution. That's why it's important to acknowledge the problem, to find solution for it. The other point I believe that which really helps to build the trust is respect for human rights and equality. That equality can be based on gender particularly because it should start from home. If you do not really respect the mother within the family, you cannot really build the trust, you cannot bring peace, and you cannot keep the peace sustainable. The lack of equality and discrimination, of course, do not build the trust. It destroys the trust between the people. And that also requires political will and honest approach to the issue.
Thank you very much, Seema. There is a lot in there already. Trust is coexistence. It starts with ourselves. It has something to do with the respect of the other and the protection also and equality. So Itonde, that's a lot to build upon. What is trust for you?
Goodness. Ambassador Bereswil, dear Pascal, thank you. And I have to thank our hosts today also for facilitating this necessary conversation at this moment. Necessary in many ways. I started in my current capacity 6 months ago, transitioning from the realm of humanitarian diplomacy and more broadly prior to that in peace mediation. And when I joined Interpeace as a president, I've been getting a repetitive question for many of the reasons that we all know and that have been referred to. First, the world is experiencing the highest number of conflicts since the end of the Second World War. Highest number of conflicts, be they within states or be they between states. And I think grappling with that reality is directly tied to the issue of a deficit of trust. A deficit of trust in advancement of cooperation internationally with regards to peace and security, you know far better than I. A deficit of trust also at a societal level with regards to whether those in, be it elected office or other positions of authority, have the credibility and trust to articulate a vision and a future for citizens in a way that is viewed in their interests. There's a deficit of trust there as well, all happening at the same time. And so the question I get regularly is, in the rise of geopolitics, is an organization like Interpeace, an international organization for peace building, a status provided for by your government, thank you, is it still relevant? I get that on a regular basis. And my response actually has been echoed here in our opening so well. Because I heard a common articulation from representatives, leaders of states and institutions, referring to a notion of peace which ultimately gets to the notion of trust, not simply from the perspective, as we put it so plainly yesterday, of the absence of war, the absence of conflict, or the absence of violence, but a vision that is rooted in enabling the conditions for communities, societies to envision a future they want with dignity and respect. The image behind you, an acacia tree, is one I share because it reflects a space, if you will, an environment, an ecosystem through which peace has been advanced for centuries ad infinitum, if you will, and remains remains a symbol, the acacia, of a place of gathering, not only for humans, but also for animals to seek shelter. And finally, if you allow me, this image also is not just a nostalgic view of the past, but also a way in which still today, in the Horn of Africa and other parts of the world, peace is made, gathered under a tree. I was privileged, Ambassador Bereswil, to serve in support of a high-level peace mediation process, facilitating dialogue between warring factions in a huge facility, all with their conference rooms. And you know what was most fascinating? Mostly men moved out, and we can talk about that, the problems of the mostly men, moved out of those formal spaces and utilized the natural environment under an acacia tree to negotiate a peace agreement. Now, I can tell you why it didn't hold, and probably because of a lack of inclusivity, not only of women, but broader representation of those in society impacted by the consequences of violence, conflict, and war.
Thank you very much. You started with the deficit of trust at every level and somehow came back to CIMA with a space of dignity, credibility, coexistence, actually. So let me move to Olin. How does that sound in your ears when you work with communities in Indonesia? What is trust for you when you work as an artist?
Yeah, thank you very much for the IC Forum Committee to invite me and Dr. Shima to come here. We are from the Peace Women Across the Globe Network. We have a booth outside. Please go visit. And yeah, about the trust in Indonesia, we have like different terms for trust. Yeah, it's we don't really use trust as a daily conversation. What we have is term related to harmony, and then belief, faith, and something like that. So we are in a very patriarchal culture in Indonesia where discrimination is everyday life and women have to pursue their dreams and goal and be stereotyped as rebellious, something like that. So if you see the picture here, this is the face of trust when you work with people in the community. This is children of Sumba Island, which is an eastern part of Indonesia. So in Indonesia, we have so many islands, but the development goes only in the big cities. So if you go further to the eastern part of Indonesia, for example, this area, then the underdevelopment are the true everyday life situation for the people there. And we work with young people, youth, women's groups, queer groups to speak about everyday life and also to create something, yeah, for them to bring out their confidence, their needs, their rights, which are not included in our formal education in Indonesia. So we don't really talk human rights in Indonesia for everyday education. So I think trust is something you have to build. You have to work on it for a long time, and we have to make a meaningful participation with the younger people, with the women's groups, with the indigenous groups. And actually, it's interesting in Indonesia, the local people actually already have this, what Dr. Sima was saying before, the coexistence. So they live with nature, they respect the nature, they take what they need, and they use the local wisdom to live coexistence with the nature and with the community there. Of course, we have problems such as violence against women, and of course, what Itonde said about the conflict happening all over the world. In Indonesia, we have like so many land conflict and conflict with the government, specifically. So if you say about trust in Indonesia, we have trust among communities, with people, with the movement, like the social movement, the women's movement. We have trust amongst that. And I think the people, for example, the people that we work for many years in Sumba Islands, maybe approaching the trust level with the civil society movement. But we are having also a very deficit trust with the policymakers, with the regulation, with the people in power. And these have to be, we have to struggle and we have to fight to have this achievement. For example, in Indonesia, we just had passed the past 2 years, the regulation of anti-sexual violence. So I think we are the first in Asia to have that regulation, which we advocate for the past 20 years to, to come to this regulation. Yeah, and this is a very participatory regulation advocacy, we can say, because we work in different islands of Indonesia. As you know, we have 17,000 islands, so it's a lot of islands and a lot of democracy process that we have to go through to make a regulation happen. And so back to the truth thing, I think we have to find, word in any country. Maybe we have different words for it, but how to make sure that we include, so inclusion for the future, because we probably sit here maybe the next 10 years, but these children, they are the one who's going to struggle and also to experience the consequences, as the previous presentation before about the brain and everything, and how could we build a brain for this generation to be a better generation to cope with all the conflict, with all this social media, the geopolitics of Indonesia. As you know, also Indonesia are going back to a dictatorship. So we'll be having another dictator in October this year. Please Google it if you want to know. So how these young people and women's group will be prepared on, all the stress and all the things that we will have to endure for the next 5 years. That will be a big question also in the Indonesia human rights and women's rights situation.
Thank you very much. So you were more or less suggesting that at the community level, there is automatic trust, this invisible power.
Yes.
So that this deficit is with the government. So let me be a bit provocative. We now want to know more about the methodology when people do not have the same approach. And, from watching children or having children, they don't always have the same approaches. So how do you build trust when they do not have the same approach or the same opinion? What is your methodology? Maybe through arts, if you can shortly give us some insights in how you do that.
Yeah, so the past 15 years, we've been working with youth and young people's community to talk about peace, gender issues, feminism, and even climate change situation that is now happening all over the world. So we started by mapping out the needs, because every island have their own specific needs. For example, in Sumba Island, the one that I work with intensively now, they are a very semi-arid area. So it's a savanna area where it's difficult for you to plant things there. So we have so many activities related to theater performance, for example. So we did a participatory art workshops with the young people, and then they write themselves their stories, like their everyday life, what they're worried, their concern. And I think mostly that we found out that the climate change actually shaped also the community in Sumba Islands, where they were before are farmers and cattle or husbandry, and now they have to move to the city, to the urban area to find jobs. Now this is what we don't want to happen with the young people. Like in Indonesia, going to a big city, it's considered a successful pathway, but not developing your village, developing your local resources that you have. And Sumba Islands is actually now the main tourism area in Indonesia for the past 10 years, maybe because of some film production that was filming there, and then it becomes viral and is famous, and now the tourists are coming to this island. So we wanted to encourage the young people to understand about their ecosystem, their land and how to protect their rights, and making sure that the investor or investment and all the government investment coming to their island and destroying their land, for example, compared to the famous tourism island in Indonesia, which is Bali Islands, if you probably know Bali Island, which is already destroyed, and they're now in a water crisis, and also this abrasion in the ocean and everything that is happening there. We don't want this island to turn into another tourism disaster, yeah, like Bali, for example. So we want to give education about rights, their land rights, their environment, the climate situation, and then they make up some stories, and then we perform it in the village area where they live to start discussion with people. So we don't really do like this kind of conference in Indonesia, but we did some art performance, music, so some young people, musicians, they make music related to the issues that they are facing now. And then also we have specific meetings for the women survivors of violence and decide with them what kind of art project that they want to do. For example, they could make poetry books and also performance, dances performance, for example. And we did also a lot of intergenerational trauma project, because as you know, Indonesia also are in the neighbor with East Timor. So East Timor is in Timor Islands. It's a small island. Half of it's a new country called East Timor, and half of it is Indonesia, yeah? And all the refugee who chooses to stay in Indonesia, stay in the western part of the island, which is a Timor Island, and then there's indigenous people living there. So yeah, there are the past 25 years, those permanent permanent housing came from these refugee camps. Okay. And then people living there. And we did also a program with the young people there for the art project in Timor Island.
Thank you very much. We have to move on. I hear that you are analyzing the needs, common needs, and trying to build a community around common needs, including with arts. How does that sound to you, Itonde? What is your methodology to forge trust between unlike-minded people?
No, thank you for this, because it's one thing to diagnose the problem and say, we have all these conflicts, but what are you going to do about it? And this is at the heart of your question, I understand. So first and foremost, I just returned less than 48 hours ago from Rwanda, where Rwanda, together with the international community, is marking, as you described, 30 years since the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. And what I encountered through the facilitation of my colleagues there was extraordinary. It speaks to methodology. We heard in the opening presentation this morning, my brain is still full by it, I have to admit. I'm downloading. How individuals who've experienced various forms of trauma, through war, through other forms of distress, re-encounter themselves and one another. What I saw personally was after 30 years, now those perpetrators convicted for crimes against humanity amounting to genocide, being now released back into society, being re-encountered by the very communities they were involved in perpetrating crimes against, as well as their own families, who have, through 3 decades, moved forward, is a tremendous effort, methodologically speaking, of what encounter means, of what quote-unquote rehumanization may entail for not only those who have been victims and moving beyond a victim identity, but also those who are perpetrators and figuring out themselves how to reimagine a future together. If they don't, then the cyclical forms of violence will perpetuate. And that encounter is powerful and occurring on a daily basis, not theoretically, but by necessity. Because of the neighborliness, the proximity of how violence erupted in Rwanda and in the Great Lakes more broadly. Now, as an institution, we refer to at least the following, drawing upon best practice. First and foremost, national ownership. You can remove national and just simply say ownership. If peace is not owned by the very individuals who are, quote unquote, benefiting from it, then it will surely be short-lived. Ownership. Secondly, we refer to engagement with all, inclusivity. Inclusivity. Specifically, we heard the president of Ethiopia yesterday give this horrific statistic of only 1 out of how many, Seema? Yesterday, I think it was 8 peace agreements in the context of last year with the proper, full, substantive participation of women. This should simply be unacceptable, because we know that the lack of inclusivity in peace processes means that they will not endure from the start. So how do you ensure that we engage all groups, including those with whom you disagree?
How do you?
Well, and this gets to the third methodology in terms of process. Right? The process matters at times just as much as the end result in itself. The design by which you have a more participatory approach. I'm not naive. Elite politics still matter. There is a place and role for this. But how you broaden the table through consultative dialogues also is crucial in terms of the requisite trust for more enduring peace.
Thank you very much. What I hear is healing, dealing with the past, healing traumas. At the example, you made the example of Rwanda. And then if you want to build trust, you need inclusivity, bring people to the table. I guess that sounds familiar to you. We have to be very short, then we can move to the questions. Seema, something about your methodology.
Well, I think it is really important to understand the society and the people, number one, and also to deal with their needs, based on their needs. Don't come with a prefabricated policy and try to implement in a country. That is really important in Afghanistan. That's why we lost. I mean, we had the USSR intervention. In one point, they had 130,000 soldiers in Afghanistan. They could not control the people because it was not accepted by the people, and it was not inclusive, as my colleague and everybody is saying. The second point, I believe, that it is really important to have a honest approach to the issue. I'm saying this because in Afghanistan, during this last 45 years, I mean, everybody sees Afghan men aggressive, dirty, with the gun, and women under the blue burqa. We are not. We were not born like that. We were made because of our geopolitical and the superpower intervention in Afghanistan. So what we need to do, I personally, for example, when I started to work among the people, I started with clinics in the different village, because people see their immediate need. They have headache, they have other pain, they need paracetamol. They don't want education for the school. They are not so interested immediately because they know that they cannot wait for another 18 years to get paracetamol for their headache. And then next year, I started with school. It was easy to do that way because they trusted me with my program. And then, of course, I went further. On clinics, I always talk about reproductive rights and women's access to contraception and reproductive rights, because it's key for a sustainable peace in any society. We see all the problem, the climate changes, the poverty, the migration, everything in this country, for example. How many migrate, including Afghans, are coming to Swiss illegally. Most of the time it's young children, underage children with no company, and they lost their life on the way. So I think it's really interesting for me. It's important that you are honest with yourself and you really wants to help the people and go to gain the heart and mind of the people by your presence. And that way we can really build the trust and build peace. And avoid double standard, actually. Double standard is always discriminatory. We see it. We see it in the world, of course. I'm very much on promotion of accountability and justice. Of course, as my colleague already said, those people who live, like the Afghans who live for so many years in Guantanamo, without any file, is that justice? I think revenge is not justice. We all have to avoid revenge. What is happening these days in this planet, again, unfortunately, is revenge. It's not justice. That's why I keep saying that particularly the youth and women who are not very much involved on violence has to stand against militarization. The amount of money that every country uses for militarization, making bombs, guns, and sophisticated drones and so on, missiles, if they spend that on development, on reproductive rights, on quality education, in promotion of human rights, we will have less conflict in this planet. And that is a responsibility of all of us.
Thank you very much. So, listen to the three of you. At first sight, it brings an enormous complexity to the question of methodology to build trust between unlike-minded. If we listen closer, and I hope the public did that with me, we hear some simple things. One is writing the story. So you're writing the story, you spoke about dealing with the past in Rwanda, you were speaking about the history of Afghan women. So it's looking at the past, understanding the past, assessing the needs for the future, and then trying to gain the hearts and the minds of people with an honest approach. So that's what I hear if I try to summarize in simple words what the three of you from your very different perspectives were saying. So now to go back to complexity, we have some very difficult questions from the audience. I would like to thank you. So first of all, the forum has not yet much touched upon the central role of vested economic interests, private gains of elites, and the political economy of violent conflicts. How can trust building play a role to overcome this devastating dynamics? Wow, not an easy one. Who wants to say a couple of words shortly so that we can address other questions?
Should we give to the minority?
Yeah.
In the stage?
Difficult question to the man.
No, it's
to
good.
be inclusive.
Look, I think this is a central question, because if it is not addressed, we know that peace will not be achieved. Full stop. Addressing interests is critical, and we can't be naive about it. And it also is a broadening of the question of what inclusivity means. I think the future of peace also requires a much more robust conversation with the private sector. Because we see the way in which the private sector not only has the capital, literally, but also the leverage in many contexts in a way that the reliance on states and multilateral systems no longer enjoy. So I think it's a challenge to our sector to see, and I know Switzerland is thinking ahead in this regard, to see how we can engage in constructive dialogue and responsibilize the way in which interests play out, so it's not only in the interest of a select few, but can benefit broader societal gain.
Okay, I think you just got an invitation to the next World Economic Forum with that, right? So, thank you very much. Not less difficult, what is the role of accountability in building trust? How do we build trust when the international system fails to hold those who violate laws and norms to account? How can the UN maintain trust when unable to enforce ceasefires and end wars in countries? I guess it's also a little bit addressed to me, but maybe one of the two ladies want to address accountability. I think, Sima, this is your topic.
Yes. I think we, as a citizen, we all have the responsibility. Yes, the power is laying on the Security Council with very, very powerful, contradicting countries, but we also have to raise our voice, stand for principle, and push for principle. And also, we do not have to we have to be very careful and do not close our eyes on the violation of human rights anywhere, anywhere. And that is really important. That's why I insist on acknowledgement of violation of human rights. And everything should be based on human rights approach, including the business and private sector or governmental sector.
Thank you very much, and you helped me. I may just add to that, I mean, we can, in the Security Council, work really hard to forge a ceasefire, as we did on Sudan and on Gaza. But then the responsibility is in all our hands, in civil society, private sector. Everyone has to make sure that this is then implemented by parties to a conflict. Everybody has to help to hold the perpetrators accountable. So that's not something the UN can do alone. So we are in partnership. The good news is we are a very, very strong community if we want to forge peace together. So maybe let us move to one more question. What are the conditions or the environment that needs to be created to establish trust between religions or cultures that have a history of hostility between them? Is that maybe something you can answer from the Indonesian perspective?
Yeah. Yeah, in Indonesia, we have this conflict in Maluku, I think 25 years ago, and now the 16 community are staying in different areas, where this is the Muslim area and that's the Christian area. And this has been, like I shared before, this has created an intergenerational trauma, and it's interesting when we heard about the brain session before, that this generation are developing under the impression that there is a segregation between the people there, and they have to accept this difference and live with the way that people are living now. And this is actually the lack of political will, what Dr. Sima said, of the government, because they are the one who are in charge on making a regulation that makes sure that people are living peacefully with each other. And also, I think there are also a lack of education in the education system in Indonesia in particular, when talking about human rights issues, gender equality. So we need to push forward in the future to making sure that the government regulation are embedded with this human rights perspective, gender equality, diversity, and talking about issues that are not really talked in the society level, because they are still in a trauma situation, they are still in a hurtful situation, and also there are also period of revenge, like Dr. Sima said, revenge towards one another in this situation. So there are tension that if it's not solved in the future, it will erupt into, I don't know, maybe another conflict. And I think what we do in the civil society movement, that we try to talk with different groups of people. So we facilitate like discussion. We did several women peace table also in the Maluku Island with the women's group and also disability groups. So I think creating this dialogue is possible to give a precedence for people that we can talk with other people that are not the same vision with us. But also, I think the government still needs to be responsible to do all this education. So it's not just in the hand of the activists.
Thank you very, very much. I understand that your job will not be done when the panel finishes, because we have a lot of questions we have not answered. So we will certainly make sure that you will have to address them after the panel. I would like to, before I wrap up, ask you, we started with a picture, so we will finish with a word looking forward. What is for you the most important word if we want to build trust between unlike-minded people with a way forward? So maybe starting with Olin again.
Okay.
One word.
One word. Yeah. I was actually going to, because of the previous panel before, with a presentation about the brain, I was going to say empathy, but I think now I'm going to change into compassion, because we need compassion now, and also believe that the future is going to be much better, but if we have compassion, if not, then it's difficult.
That's rational compassion, Itonde?
Encounter. I think it's critical that Switzerland continues to provide those spaces for individuals to encounter one another, even in situations of conflict, and preparing the ground for when a more durable peace can be possible.
Encounter, Sima?
Well, I fully agree with both of them. I think Swiss, as an impartial, hope it's not member of the NATO yet, and should create space for discussion and building trust. And that can be only, in my view, based on human rights approach and respect for human dignity. So when I was listening to the first, the opening remark this morning, and I was thinking that the people who are suffering from hunger and starvation, how do we expect to have a functional, positive brain? So I would say to the world, to the superpowers, don't send bombs, don't send missiles, then don't send relief also.
So the word is?
The word is development based on human rights approach and equality.
Human rights, equality, right? Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. So let me try to wrap that up. Not an easy task. I think, like peace, we have understood that trust is a hugely complex flower, and there is never a finished moment. It's a process, it's a fragile flower that needs constant care. And I think, second, it's worthwhile being more precise in our analysis of trust and the trust crisis, and I think the discussion also showed that we approach it from very many angles. We didn't have time to develop each and every angle, but I think in our peace work, this is worthwhile trying to do. So we should not overlook the common ground we have. There is not always just trust crisis, there is a lot of common ground, but it needs tailor-made approaches. There is no one-size-fits-all to the trust crisis. And trust has, and we saw it in our brain, the more intuitive part, empathy, and then the rational compassion. So I think it's also worthwhile to have a dual approach to building trust, meaning we need this kind of answer to the more emotional part, which is arts, emotion, music. We hear music here. And then we also have the more rational, intellectual approach where we have to analyze deeply what actually the trust crisis is. So we can combine those two aspects, and we can do it also very innovatively with new technologies, trying to use the better side of them to help us. It will never go without dialogue. Dialogue means listening, means trying to understand where people come from. And I think it was very clear from all of your inputs that it needs inclusivity, participation, in particular also from women's peace makers. So I would finish again with a quote by the philosopher I started with and say, it's in your hands. Give trust the space to breathe. Thank you very, very much for being with us today. And thank you very much for
thank you, Ambassador.
Fantastic panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for your contributions. Thank you also, Pascal Berisville, for the moderation, for your contribution, and thank you also to the audience, both online and here in Basel, for your questions.
It's time for a break now, but before that, let me quickly remind you of the program afterwards, because like yesterday, there are 3 sessions. Session number 4, talking about water and peace, is in breakout room 1. Session 5, commodities and peace, will take place in breakout room 2. And here in the plenary, session 6 will be held about security and peace.
And your contribution during the sessions is really crucial. So we look forward to hearing your thoughts and ideas. And we will meet you later at 1:30 to present the Basel Manifesto. And there is also another plenary session, panel discussion. So have a pleasant and productive morning and see you later. And thank you again.